Well, the third Republican debate just happened. Here's a breakdown of what was said by each of the candidates. We're going to start with Vivek. I'll provide some fact-checking, and I'll provide a little bit of commentary as well. First, Vivek starts off really aggressive, which good for him because that's what gets him attention, especially on social media. Probably doesn't help him get more airtime on the show. Maybe some of those attacks could be saved for later, but his attacks were popular. 75% of the people that I polled were in support of what he did, and in the first 9 minutes of the debate, Vivek starts off hot. Goes in to call Republicans and the existing Republican Party a party of losers, that ever since Ronna took over the Republican National Convention, Republicans have been an unhappy party of losers, is what he's arguing. He's saying there wasn't a red wave, there should have been, and really, Republicans are covering for fraud, essentially. And his argument is that, hey, you know what? We need a new generation. So that's his take. He believes that by being aggressive, he can be that change that America needs. Problem with that is he potentially going too far? That's what some are saying. For example, tonight, Vivek proposed cutting 75% of the American government's staff, not including the military. This would be the federal government. Well, you've got over 2 million workers at the federal government, which represents a little over 1.3% of all of our American workforce. Given the velocity of money, if we just use a velocity of 2, we would basically instantaneously be in a recession. So I'm not sure if that's the best move to maybe cutting fat out of the government, but it's clearly a position. This is along the lines of Vivek suggesting that he would basically eliminate the Department of Education and the FBI. These actually some things we're starting to hear other politicians talk about now as well, though. So it is something that is gaining traction in the Republican Party. Republican Party has regularly been for smaller government, whereas the Democratic Party has been more for larger government. I think that's pretty obvious to say. Now, on Israel, Vivek argued that we should smoke the terrorists on their own, smoke the terrorists in the southern border of Israel. However, we should also do the same thing here in America. And that's the same argument that many of the Republicans on stage tonight had. It sounds a lot like he's picking up a lot of the sort of the Trumpian attacks to really gain popularity, and quite frankly, it worked very well for Donald Trump. Will it actually move Vivek up in the polls? We'll see. But he makes very clear and very poignant arguments. He was the only one to bring up nuclear. I wish we had more of a discussion on nuclear energy and more discussion about oil futures than we did about nuclear, which is unfortunate for the debate. We'll say the third debate was much more organized than the Fox debates were. So shout out to NBC for that one. He does talk about this cancer in our society, and he believes one way to solve this cancer in our society is to limit the size of government and then help basically people make more money. That if people make more money and there's more supply of stuff, we could reduce inflation. People are happier because they make more money. One other downside, though, to consider is if you just instantly start shutting down departments, especially ones that businesses rely on, whether that's the SEC, the FTC, or other departments, you potentially do slow down business development. So there are definitely some considerations here. At one point, Vivek suggested that, and I'm not sure if these are just sound bites of his, but at one point he suggested we should immediately declare independence from China and basically not import goods from China. Now, obviously, this is something that you would have to do over time, kind of like the Biden administration is doing via the Inflation Reduction Act or the CHIPS Act, which maybe people don't necessarily agree with all the provisions of that, but that is bringing home manufacturing. Problem with just saying we don't need China anymore is we kind of do. We import over $575 billion per year from China, $145 billion worth of electronic equipment, $112 billion worth of nuclear reactors and machinery. That's a big deal. People think it's mostly toys. 9% is toys. About 7% is plastic, and then you get into rubbers and paints and tools and lubricants and copper. We're dependent on China. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I also don't think just saying, let's end everything right away is the right answer. He also suggests that Airbnb gives your data to China. I think this is a little bit of a miss because that's Airbnb China. So if you go to an Airbnb in China, they do, at least as far as we're aware. Now, as far as land use restrictions, he's a big fan of building more in America, growing America, American real estate opportunities. Big fan of that. I think that's a great idea. He does talk about one way that you could solve the social security crisis is by stop spending basically as much money on foreign wars like Ukraine and what's going on with funding Israel or arming Taiwan. These are things that are very different from a DeSantis or Haley, who are much for, hey, let's fund military operations in different countries so that way we don't have to spend essentially American lives. We're financing wars, essentially leveraging other people's militaries to weaken our enemies, be it Russia, be it Iran, and otherwise. Unfortunately, the Biden administration gets a little bit of egg on their face for the $6 billion deal with Iran. Of course, those funds have been frozen in Qatar, so technically they didn't get these deals, but clearly the diplomacy method didn't work to restrain groups funded by Iran, at least in part, like Hamas, Hezbollah, or the Houthis, which, keep in mind, Houthi rebels just shot down a United States drone just today, actually, and took responsibility immediately for striking down this drone. This is yet another attack on Americans. This is, an American device at least. This is an MQ-9 Reaper drone. In just the past few weeks that this war in Israel and this conflict has been going on, we've had about 38 attacks in Iraq and Syria on American either facilities, bases, or other equipment. Okay, so this is, I do also one more thing on Vivek questions some of the practicality of him suggesting that, you should have we should not forget about the northern border, that we have a southern border that fentanyl flows through, which is true. The DEA suggesting that the vast majority of, and Customs and Border Protection suggesting that 98.9% of fentanyl comes into America flows through the Mexican border. That does leave maybe up to 1% for Canada, but then went as far as suggesting that we need to build a wall at the northern border and that we should build both walls. I think he's going to walk that one back pretty quickly, but some folks are wondering, is Vivek a little too rash? Is he willing to say something extreme to try to gain votes, but then is that how he would also operate as president? Of course, then other people say, well, he wouldn't be rash as president, but when first time around Donald Trump got elected, people said, he'll clean up his act when he gets on Twitter when he's president. He didn't change a bit, right? So anyway, okay, so that gives us a little bit on Vivek. For DeSantis, he also talks about the idea of new leadership, that the elites don't care about you and that he will. The question here is, do people trust DeSantis? DeSantis lost a lot of momentum when he really went hard after Disney. And don't get me wrong, a lot of people are really anti the woke agenda, and some people are for it. Okay, everybody has their choice here, but I think his aggressiveness and anti-Disney, the company's, at least if you look at the stock, has felt like it's almost been self-destructing. But they're trying. I don't know that aggressiveness, the weaponization almost of the Floridian government, was the right answer there, and that's what a lot of folks criticize DeSantis for. DeSantis did come out swinging, though. He did suggest that, hey, Donald Trump didn't pay for any of the wall, and that instead, DeSantis is now going to finish building the wall, and he's going to make Mexico pay for it. He said he would do that through remittances, so when people send money to Mexico, back home to family after working here, he's going to somehow tax that. I don't know if our farmers are big fans of that, but okay, it's a way to borrow from Donald Trump, a Donald Trumpian line, and try to use it for yourself, I guess. Anyway, he talks about finishing the job once and for all. Definitely slammed Nikki Haley for her 2014 letter to the ambassador of China. Some detail on that. Nikki Haley's administration did apparently reach out, according to the LA Times and KCCI. Both of them suggested that Nikki Haley reached out to the Chinese government essentially to build a fiberglass facility in her state, which they ended up doing in 2016. The 2014 letter was looking for an economic partnership with China to try to bring jobs to the area, and yes, that did happen. Of course, Nikki Haley tries to distance herself from China, now argues that China and Russia are the biggest threats that we have to fight. She's a big fan of this idea, DeSantis is a big fan of this idea of ripping up the Green New Deal. There technically isn't a Green New Deal. That was a proposal, but what he's talking about is undoing the Bidenomics executive orders. For example, we just had an executive order from the Biden administration within the last 4 weeks that basically funds employing 20,000 young adults to build trails, plant trees, and install solar panels. Now, DeSantis got hit a little bit again for his executive order on opposing offshore drilling off the coast of Florida and also banning fracking in the Everglades. This didn't get a lot of airtime, just a small note. We can now move on to Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley suggests 50% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. Fact check on that. It's actually about 61%. She says our kids won't forgive us for our debt. Personally, quick little side note on that. I think my 8-year-old and 5-year-old, if the economy recovers through all this inflation, probably won't be thinking about this debt, much like we don't think about the debt that was spent 20 years ago, thanks to the fact that the number will probably look a whole lot bigger in 10 to 20 years. So I'm a big fan of fiscal responsibility, but $30 trillion sounds like a lot now. But I have a feeling in 10 or 20 years, it's going to be a drop in the bucket. That's not a good thing, okay? It's not something to laugh at. I'm just like, relatively, the rate we're on, it is unsustainable. And today's numbers, like, we're probably not going to forgive our kids for what they're going to print. It's going to be the other way around. It's like, hey, we printed 30, you guys printed 200. Yeah, anyway, so Nikki Haley argued that China saves money buying oil from Iran. She's not incorrect about this. This is actually true. You've got China, according to Reuters, saving about $10 billion per year buying oil from Iran. That's China saves that money because, they're not following U.S. or Western sanctions because they're not part of them, and therefore they get discounted Iranian oil, which is basically the same stuff. It's just got a little label on it that says it's Iranian. Theoretically, they could just arb it. I mean, they could just take the barrels and take the Iranian flag off and put the Chinese flag on it and sell it to America. Arbitrage. Nikki Haley goes on to say that Hamas would kill you as well, and that, we need to be very strong in being anti-Hamas. DeSantis did shut down a group at local colleges in Florida that he suggests were posting pro-Hamas messages. They're a Palestinian group, however, apparently were applauding the Hamas attack and were therefore shut down. Vivek attacked this and suggested there's no place for censorship in America. Putin and China are salivating at Vivek becoming president, says Nikki Haley. This was a sort of an attack, a slam that she was able to provide after Vivek suggesting that we should stop funding as much as we do in Ukraine and Taiwan. Haley very pro arming Taiwan, more weapons, prevent China's growth, and limit their capabilities. Big fan of attacking Mexico with strategic strikes. Vivek and DeSantis a little bit more aggressive, with DeSantis going as far as suggesting we would just deploy the military to the border and authorize essentially deadly force to finish the job in Mexico. Nikki Haley suggesting deploying 25,000 additional Border Patrol and troops. Moving on to Scott, he argues that appeasement leads to war, and he suggests the wars and conflicts we face now are due to Obama and Biden being weak against China and Russia. A lot of folks on the Republican side argue that Donald Trump is the best way to limit war, and because of the way either Trump negotiates or whatever it might be, his strength in foreign policy, however. Do keep in mind we had a substantial trade war throughout 2018, 17, mostly 2018, with Donald Trump and China. However, there was no physical war at that point, although, keep in mind, we did have a much more substantial presence in the Middle East then than we do now, although that might be changing with Israel. Anywho, as far as Christie, not too much, by the way, new from Christie and Scott. They relatively similar things that we've heard. I mean, Scott, he talks about investing in innovation, energy, and disconnecting from China. It sounded very Biden-esque. I hate to say it for his purposes, but it sounded very Biden-esque. Christie talked about Israel essentially having an intelligence failure, but we promised 31 years ago to support Israel in the trilateral agreement we made between the United States, Israel, the trilateral agreement, my fault. Let me correct that here. We promised we'd support Israel, and Israel's intelligence failed. Keep supporting Israel. That's one item that he says. Second item that he talks about is we need to keep supporting Ukraine because back 31 years ago, we had a trilateral negotiation, United States, Ukraine, Russia, and if Ukraine agreed to give up their nuclear warheads to Russia, we would support them if Russia ever attacked them. And so here we are 31 years later. Sort of the Christie argument. Christie did suggest ban TikTok, although TikTok ran like 3 to 4 ads every single break. We had a TikTok ad during the debate. So the debate was clearly brought to you by TikTok. Unlike this YouTube video, which is brought to you by the Noob vs. Pro courses, with a coupon code expiring this Friday. This Friday, the Noob vs. Pro courses, which are on pre-sale, will be going up substantially, so make sure you get in before this Friday at 11:59 p.m. We're getting close to that content releasing, which is slated for the end of the month / beginning of December. We're really excited to start releasing that content. It's amazing on everything from building your wealth, investing in real estate, how to become a better entrepreneur, nutrition for entrepreneurs, you name it. There's something there for you. Go check that out. They're great ways to make money. Go to meetkevin.com to learn more about those. And so that wraps up a summary of everything that we just heard for the Republican debate. Now that it's over, I'm going to turn my grumpy mug around and say thank you very much for being here. I'm also going to quickly read this so I don't get in trouble. Even though I'm a licensed financial advisor, licensed real estate broker, and becoming a stockbroker, this video is neither personalized financial advice nor real estate advice for you. It's not tax, legal, or personalized advice tailored to you. It's certainly not reasonably sufficient information for the purposes of evaluating security. It's not a research report. I personally operate an actively managed ETF and hold long positions of various securities, potentially including those mentioned in this video. However, I have no relationships to any issuers, nor am I presently acting as a market maker. Boom. It's that simple. Laminate it. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate y'all. We'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.